On their wedding night, the millionaire whispered, "Trust me," and she lost herself in his arms. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't be fixing her hair for the 100th time, but she couldn't help it. Amelia Johnson stood before the antique mirror in her childhood bedroom, her delicate fingers adjusting the soft curls that framed her face. At 25, she possessed a natural elegance that seemed effortless. Warm brown skin that glowed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains, expressive dark eyes that held both intelligence and a hint of mischief, and a smile that could light up any room when she wasn't overthinking everything. "Stop fussing, sweetheart," her mother's voice drifted from the hallway. "You look beautiful." Amelia turned from the mirror, smoothing down the cream-colored dress she'd chosen for today's meeting. The fabric fell perfectly around her petite frame, sophisticated yet youthful. Her family's Victorian home in Atlanta's historic district had always been her sanctuary, filled with generations of love, laughter, and the kind of stability that bred both confidence and, ironically, a fear of the unknown. "I'm not fussing, Mama," she called back, though they both knew it was a lie. The sound of expensive car doors closing in the driveway made her stomach flutter. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a sleek black sedan, the kind that whispered money rather than shouting it. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied one final coat of lip gloss. This was it, the day she would meet Leonard Clark. The arrangement had been discussed in hushed tones over Sunday dinners for months. Her parents, pillars of Atlanta's established community, had explained it with the same gentle authority they'd used when teaching her piano or proper table manners. The Clark family needed this alliance, and so did theirs. It was practical, sensible, the kind of decision their great-grandparents would have understood perfectly. What they hadn't prepared her for was how utterly terrified she would feel. "Amelia, darling, they're here," her father announced from downstairs, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when discussing important matters. She took one last look in the mirror, straightened her shoulders, and whispered a small prayer. At the top of the staircase, she paused, hearing the deep rumble of an unfamiliar male voice mixing with her parents' more familiar tones in the living room. Her first glimpse of Leonard Clark nearly made her miss the last step. He stood with his back to the staircase, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. When he turned at the sound of her approach, she found herself looking into the most striking pair of steel blue eyes she'd ever seen. His dark hair was styled impeccably, and despite being 11 years her senior, there was something almost boyish about the way he straightened his already perfect posture. "Mr. Clark," she said softly, extending her hand with the grace her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "Miss Johnson." His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with just a hint of warmth beneath the formality. When his fingers closed around hers, she noticed they were surprisingly gentle for someone with such an intimidating reputation. Her father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all sit and discuss the arrangements." As they settled into the familiar comfort of her family's living room, Amelia found herself stealing glances at Leonard. The rumors about his coldness seemed exaggerated. Yes, he was reserved, speaking only when directly addressed, but there was something in the way he listened that suggested depth rather than disinterest. "The ceremony will be small," her mother was saying. "Just immediate family and a few close friends." "That sounds appropriate," Leonard replied, his gaze briefly meeting Amelia's before returning to her parents. She almost smiled at how surreal this felt, planning a wedding with a man she'd just met, discussing flower arrangements and guest lists as if they were old friends, rather than virtual strangers bound by family obligations. "Do you have any preferences for the flowers?" her mother asked Leonard directly. He was quiet for a moment, then surprised everyone by looking at Amelia. "What do you like?" It was such a simple question, yet it was the first time anyone had asked for her opinion about her own wedding. "Peonies," she said without thinking. "Pink peonies and white roses." "Then that's what we'll have," he said simply, and something in his tone made her believe he actually meant it. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of dates and details, but Amelia found herself focusing more on the man beside her than on the wedding plans. Leonard Clark was nothing like what she'd expected. Yes, he was reserved, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful. When he looked at her, which wasn't often, but enough for her to notice, there was something almost curious in his expression. As the afternoon drew to a close and Leonard prepared to leave, he turned to her one final time. "Miss Johnson," he said quietly, I hope you'll find this arrangement agreeable. There was something vulnerable in the way he said it, as if her answer actually mattered to him. Amelia felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Not love, certainly not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. I believe I will, Mr. Clark, she replied with a gentle smile that seemed to catch him off guard. As his car disappeared down the tree-lined street, Amelia remained on the porch, her mind swirling with questions and possibilities. In 3 weeks, she would be Mrs. Leonard Clark, married to a man she barely knew, but who had somehow managed to surprise her in their first meeting. What she didn't expect was how much that simple question about flowers would keep replaying in her mind, or how the memory of his steel blue eyes would follow her into her dreams that night. You're glowing, and it's making me nauseous. Amelia laughed despite her nerves as her best friend Celeste dramatically threw herself across the boutique's velvet sofa. They'd been dress shopping for 3 hours, and somehow every gown felt like a costume for a play she wasn't sure she wanted to star in. I'm not glowing, Amelia protested, though she caught herself smoothing her hair in the mirror, a habit that had intensified since meeting Leonard 2 weeks ago. Oh, please. Ever since you met Mr. Mysterious Millionaire, you've had this little smile that you probably don't even realize you're wearing. Celeste sat up, her dark eyes twinkling with mischief. Spill. What's he really like? Amelia considered the question while running her fingers along a silk dress that cost more than most people's rent. How could she explain that Leonard Clark was nothing like what she'd expected? That in their brief phone conversations to finalize wedding details, he'd surprised her by asking about her favorite coffee, whether she preferred morning or evening ceremonies, if she'd be comfortable with photographers. He's thoughtful, she said finally. Thoughtful? Celeste raised an eyebrow. Girl, you're marrying a hotel mogul worth millions and the best you can come up with is thoughtful? Does he at least look good in a suit? Heat crept up Amelia's neck. He looks adequate. The lie was so obvious that both women burst into laughter. The truth was, Leonard Clark looked far better than adequate. He looked like the kind of man who belonged on magazine covers, all sharp jawlines and commanding presence. But admitting that felt like revealing too much, even to Celeste. Adequate, Celeste repeated, grinning. Right, and I'm just adequate at playing piano. Celeste was a concert pianist who'd performed at Carnegie Hall twice. Can we please focus on finding a dress? Amelia deflected, though she was smiling now. The boutique owner, Madame Cordelia, a French woman who'd somehow ended up in Atlanta and treated wedding dress selection like a sacred art, appeared with another option. Perhaps this one, chérie. Simple, elegant, but with, how you say, de personality. The dress was stunning. Ivory silk with delicate beadwork that caught the light, sophisticated enough to match Leonard's refined taste, but with a softness that felt authentically her. Try it, Celeste urged. In the dressing room, as Madame Cordelia helped her into the gown, Amelia caught sight of herself in the three-way mirror and froze. For the first time, she looked like a bride rather than a girl playing dress-up. Beautiful, Madame Cordelia murmured. But you look, how you say, frightened. It's just big, Amelia admitted quietly. This whole thing, marriage, it is always big, no? But sometimes the biggest leaps bring us to where we are meant to be. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Celeste's expression shifted from playful to genuinely moved. Oh, honey, is it too much? It's perfect. You're perfect. Celeste's voice was softer now. And if this Leonard Clark doesn't appreciate exactly how lucky he is, I'll personally drive to his fancy hotel and give him a piece of my mind. Amelia was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope your dress shopping is going well. L. She stared at the message, her pulse quickening. How had he known she was dress shopping today? Had he remembered their conversation about her appointment, or... Who's texting you? Celeste peered over her shoulder and her eyes widened. He's texting you. What did you tell him about today? Nothing specific, just that I had errands. Amelia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you respond to your arranged fiancé's unexpectedly sweet gesture? She typed back, found the perfect one. Thank you for asking. The response came almost immediately. I'm sure you look beautiful in whatever you chose. Celeste made a small squeaking sound. Okay, that's not what emotionally unavailable millionaires text, Amelia. That's what smitten men text. He's just being polite, Amelia protested, though her cheeks were warm. Polite is, hope shopping goes well. What he wrote is... Celeste paused dramatically. Romantic. Before Amelia could argue, her phone buzzed again. Would you like to have dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet, to talk about the ceremony details. This time, both women stared at the phone in silence. He wants to have dinner, Amelia whispered. Not lunch, not coffee, dinner, Celeste emphasized. Somewhere quiet. To talk. She made air quotes. Amelia, this man is courting you. It's just practical. Nothing about this is practical, Celeste laughed. A practical man would have his assistant coordinate details. This man wants to spend an evening with you. Amelia looked at herself in the mirror again, seeing past the elegant dress to the uncertainty in her eyes. In 1 week, she would walk down the aisle to marry Leonard Clark. The question was she brave enough to let herself hope this could become something real? Her phone was still in her hands. She could feel both women waiting for her response, Celeste with barely contained excitement, Madame Cordelia with knowing patience. Finally she typed, "I'd like that. 7 o'clock? Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable. Something comfortable. Not dress formally or business appropriate. Something comfortable." "Well?" Celeste demanded. Amelia set down her phone and looked at her reflection one more time. In the beautiful dress, with the warm afternoon light streaming through the boutique windows, she almost looked like a woman ready to fall in love. "I have a dinner date," she said softly. And for the first time since this arrangement began, she found herself genuinely curious about what Leonard Clark would be like when it was just the two of them. No parents, no formal agendas, just a man and a woman getting to know each other over dinner. The question was she ready to find out who she might become in his presence? He was early. Of course he was early. Amelia spotted Leonard through her bedroom window, leaning against his car in the driveway, checking his watch with the kind of precision that suggested punctuality was more than a habit. It was a philosophy. He'd traded his formal suits for dark jeans and a navy sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and devastatingly handsome. "Breathe, Amelia," she whispered to her reflection, adjusting the soft peach cardigan she'd chosen over a simple white dress. "Comfortable," he'd said. She hoped her interpretation matched his. When she opened the front door, Leonard straightened immediately, and for a moment they just looked at each other. His steel blue eyes swept over her appearance with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look lovely," he said simply, but there was something warmer in his voice than she'd heard before. "Thank you. So do you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Shall we?" Instead of the expensive restaurant she'd expected, Leonard drove them to a small cafe in Virginia Highland, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. It was charming, unpretentious, and completely unexpected. "This is lovely," she said as they settled into a corner booth, and she meant it. "I wasn't sure about your taste in restaurants," Leonard admitted, sliding his hands around a coffee cup that looked almost comically small in his large fingers. "But you mentioned you like quiet places during our phone call last week." She had mentioned that, in passing, while they discussed reception venues. The fact that he'd remembered and chosen accordingly sent a flutter through her chest. "I do. Big crowds make me nervous." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "Actually, most things make me nervous lately. Including this." He gestured between them. "Especially this." She laughed softly, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Is that terrible to admit?" "Not at all. I'd be concerned if you weren't nervous." Leonard was quiet for a moment. "I'm nervous too." The admission caught her off guard. Leonard Clark, successful, composed, seemingly unshakable Leonard Clark, was nervous. "You are?" "Terrified," he said with a self-deprecating smile that transformed his entire face. "I haven't done this before." "What?" "Dinner, dating, courtship, whatever this is." He ran a hand through his hair, mussing the perfect styling. "My relationships have always been straightforward, transactional. This feels complicated, important." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Amelia felt something shift in her chest. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why did you agree to this arrangement? I mean, really, why?" Leonard was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "My father died when I was 12, he said. "Heart attack. My mother raised me alone, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. When she got sick 2 years ago, cancer, she made me promise I wouldn't end up alone like she did, that I'd find someone to build a life with." "And you chose an arranged marriage?" "I chose the path of least resistance," he admitted. "Or so I thought. Love seemed unreliable, dangerous even. But an arrangement based on mutual respect and compatibility? That felt manageable." "And now?" He looked at her directly, those blue eyes intense. Now I'm sitting across from a woman who makes me question everything I thought I knew about manageable. The breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected to have with her arranged fiancé over coffee and pastries. "Your turn," he said gently. "Why did you agree?" Amelia traced the rim of her coffee cup, gathering courage. "Because I was scared of never being brave enough to choose for myself. My parents, they love me, but they've always made the big decisions. College, career, even my friends were sort of pre-approved." She laughed, but it came out shaky. "An arranged marriage felt like one more decision I didn't have to make. And now," she met his eyes, "now I'm wondering what would happen if I started making my own choices. Such as," her heart hammered against her ribs, "such as choosing to be here, really be here, not just going through the motions." Something shifted in Leonard's expression. Surprise, relief, hope, all mixed together. "I'd like that," he said quietly. They talked for 2 hours after that. About books. They both loved mystery novels and had strong opinions about coffee preparation. About travel. He'd been everywhere for business, but had never truly explored anywhere for pleasure. About dreams. Hers to maybe teach music someday, his to take a vacation where no one could reach him by phone. "You play music?" Leonard asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Piano. Not very well," she said modestly. "I doubt that's true. Would you play for me sometime?" The request was so simple, so personal, that it took her breath away. "I'd like that." As they prepared to leave, Leonard hesitated at the cafe door. "Amelia, I want you to know, this week, before the wedding, if you change your mind, if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll understand. No questions, no consequences. Your happiness is more important than any arrangement." She stared at him, this man who continued to surprise her at every turn. A week ago, she'd been terrified of marrying a stranger. Now she was terrified of something else entirely, how much she was starting to care about him. "What if I don't want to change my mind?" she asked softly. "Then I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice." As he drove her home through the quiet Atlanta streets, Amelia gazed out the window and realized something had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer being carried along by other people's decisions. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, and that path seemed to be leading her straight toward the complicated, surprising, unexpectedly tender heart of Leonard Clark. "You're humming again." Amelia's fingers froze over the piano keys as her mother's voice drifted from the kitchen. She hadn't even realized she was doing it. The same melody had been floating through her mind for 3 days, ever since her dinner with Leonard. "Sorry, Mama," she called back, though she wasn't sorry at all. "Don't apologize for being happy, sweetheart. It's been too long since I heard you play with such lightness." Lightness. That was exactly what she felt, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The wedding was in 4 days, and instead of panic, she felt something dangerously close to anticipation. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts, and she glanced at the antique clock on the mantel. 7:30 in the evening. They weren't expecting anyone. "I'll get it," she called, smoothing her casual sundress as she walked to the front door. Leonard stood on her porch, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He'd ditched his usual polished appearance for jeans and a simple white button-down with rolled sleeves that revealed strong forearms. In his hands, he held a small bouquet of pink peonies. "I should have called," he said immediately. "I was driving by and saw the lights on, and I remembered you mentioning you play piano." "You remembered?" The words came out softer than she intended. "I remember everything you tell me." He offered her the flowers with a shy smile that made her heart skip. "I was hoping, well, I know I said I'd like to hear you play sometime, and if tonight isn't good, tonight is perfect." She accepted the peonies, their sweet fragrance filling the space between them. "Come in." Her parents appeared from the kitchen, her mother wiping her hands on a dish towel and her father carrying the newspaper he'd been reading. "Leonard, what a pleasant surprise," her mother said warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Johnson. I brought these for Amelia." He gestured to the flowers with endearing nervousness. How thoughtful. Peonies are her favorite. Her mother's knowing smile made Amelia's cheeks warm. "Would you like some coffee? Tea?" her father offered. "Actually," Amelia found herself saying, "Leonard came to hear me play piano. Would you mind if we—" "Of course, darling. We were just heading upstairs to catch up on some reading," her mother said, already nudging her father toward the stairs with barely contained excitement. When they were alone, Leonard looked around the living room with genuine interest. His gaze lingered on the baby grand piano that dominated one corner, its polished surface reflecting the warm lamplight. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It was my grandmother's. She taught me to play when I was little." Amelia ran her fingers along the keys without pressing them. "I haven't played for anyone outside the family in years." "We don't have to if you're not comfortable." "I want to." The certainty in her own voice surprised her. "I want you to hear this." She settled onto the bench, and Leonard took a seat in the nearby armchair, leaning forward with attentive anticipation. For a moment, her hands hovered over the keys as nerves threatened to overwhelm her. Then she began to play. The melody that flowed from her fingers was gentle and haunting. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her grandmother's favorites. As the music filled the room, she felt herself relax into the familiar comfort of the keys beneath her hands. When she glanced at Leonard, she found him watching her, with an expression of complete absorption, as if she were the only person in the world. The intensity of his focus should have made her nervous, but instead, it made her play with more confidence, more emotion. The final notes faded into silence, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Amelia," his voice was rough with emotion. "You're extraordinary. It's just Chopin." "No." He stood up, moving closer to the piano. "It's not just anything. That was beautiful. You're beautiful when you play." Something in his tone made her look up, and she found him standing just a few feet away, his blue eyes dark with something she couldn't quite name. "Play something else," he said softly. This time she chose something more playful, a jazz piece her grandmother had taught her that always made her smile. As she played, she was aware of Leonard moving, and when she looked up, she found he'd come around to the other side of the piano, watching her hands dance across the keys. "So you're smiling," he observed. "This piece always makes me happy. Grandmama used to say music should make you feel something, even if you're the only one listening. What do you feel when you play?" The question was so personal, so intimate, that she almost stopped playing. "Free," she admitted, "like I can be completely myself without having to explain or apologize." "You never have to apologize for being yourself, not with me." The sincerity in his voice made her fingers stumble over the keys. She looked up to find him watching her with that same intense focus, but now there was something else. Tenderness, admiration, and something that looked dangerously like adoration. "Leonard," she began, but didn't know how to finish. "I know this arrangement didn't start conventionally," he said quietly, "but sitting here, listening to you play, watching you come alive like this, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Her hands had gone still on the keys. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 4 days ago I thought I was getting married for practical reasons. Now," he paused, running a hand through his hair, "now I'm hoping you might be starting to feel what I'm feeling, which is, like maybe this could be the beginning of something real." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Amelia felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, and for the first time in her life the fall looked more thrilling than terrifying. "Leonard," she said softly, "what if we're both overthinking this?" "What do you mean?" She stood up from the piano bench, suddenly brave in a way that surprised her. "What if we stopped analyzing and just let ourselves feel?" He took a step closer, close enough that she could catch the faint scent of his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. His skin was warm and she felt him lean into her touch. "Amelia," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like music. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning at first, as if he were asking permission. But when she responded, rising up on her toes to meet him more fully, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of possibility and promise and the sweet, terrifying prospect of falling in love. When they finally broke apart, her heart was racing and his forehead was resting against hers. 4 days, she whispered. 4 days, he agreed. And for the first time since this all began, 4 days felt like both an eternity and not nearly long enough. Tomorrow she would be Mrs. Leonard Clark. Amelia stared at her wedding dress hanging on the back of her bedroom door, moonlight from the window casting it in an ethereal glow. The ivory silk seemed to shimmer with possibility, or maybe that was just her imagination running wild at midnight on the eve of her wedding. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A text from Leonard. "Can't sleep either." She smiled, typing back, "How did you know I was awake?" Lucky guess. Or maybe we're more connected than we thought. The response made her heart flutter. 3 days had passed since their kiss at the piano, and each interaction had only deepened the unexpected intimacy growing between them. Phone calls that stretched past midnight, a lunch where they'd talked so long, the restaurant staff had to politely ask them to leave. A walk through Piedmont Park, where Leonard had surprised her by knowing the names of different flowers. "Are you having second thoughts?" she typed, then immediately regretted the question. Some things were too vulnerable for text messages. Her phone rang instead of buzzing with another text. "Never about you." Leonard's voice was soft in her ear, intimate in the darkness of her room. "But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous." "Good nervous or bad nervous?" "The kind of nervous you get before something that might change your life completely." Amelia curled up in her window seat, looking out at the quiet Atlanta street. "I keep thinking about what my grandmother used to say about marriage." "What did she say?" "That the best marriages aren't built on perfection, they're built on two imperfect people choosing each other over and over again." She paused, her voice growing softer. "But how do we know if we're choosing each other, or if we're just following a plan?" Leonard was quiet for so long, she wondered if the call had dropped. "Amelia," he said finally, "can I ask you to do something that might sound crazy?" At this point, crazy sounds refreshing. "Meet me, right now." "Leonard, it's midnight." "I know. And I know about tradition and not seeing each other before the wedding, but I need to see you. Not as your arranged fiancé, not with our parents watching, just us." Her pulse quickened. "Where? Do you remember that cafe where we had dinner? There's a little park across the street. I'm already here. You're there now." She peered out her window, as if she could somehow see across the city to where he was. "I've been driving around for 2 hours, thinking, and I keep coming back to the same place where everything started feeling real." The vulnerability in his voice decided for her. "Give me 20 minutes. She threw on jeans and a soft sweater, grabbed her keys and snuck out of the house like a teenager. The drive through empty Atlanta streets felt surreal, as if she were moving through a dream towards something inevitable. She found Leonard sitting on a park bench under a street lamp, still dressed in the slacks and button-down from what must have been a very long day. When he saw her approaching, he stood up, and even in the dim light she could see the relief in his expression. "You came," he said simply. "Of course I came." She settled beside him on the bench, acutely aware of the space between them. "So what's keeping you up on the night before our wedding?" He turned to face her fully. "The realization that I'm about to marry someone I'm falling in love with, and I have no idea if she feels the same way." The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying and completely honest. "Leonard," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. Tomorrow, we're going to walk down that aisle in front of our families, make vows that were written for us by tradition and expectation. And that's fine, that's what we agreed to. But tonight, before all of that, I want you to know that what I'm feeling isn't about arrangements or family alliances or practical decisions." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and slightly trembling. "I'm falling for the woman who gets nervous about big crowds, but plays piano like she was born to make music, who laughs at her own jokes before she tells them, who chooses peonies over roses and thinks about other people's feelings before her own, who's brave enough to meet a virtual stranger in a park at midnight because he asked her to." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You see all that? I see you, Amelia, the real you. And I'm terrified because I never expected to feel this much, this fast about someone who was supposed to be a practical choice." She was quiet for a moment, watching their joined hands in the lamplight. When she looked up, his blue eyes were intense with waiting. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said softly. "Anything. I've been practicing saying Mrs. Clark in the mirror." She laughed, embarrassed by the admission. "Not because I'm supposed to, but because I want to. Because when I imagine my future now, I can't imagine it without you in it." Relief washed over his features. "Really, really, you want to know what's keeping me awake? It's not cold feet or second thoughts. It's wondering how someone I barely knew 3 weeks ago has become the person I most want to talk to at the end of every day." He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "So what do we do with that?" "We make a choice," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not our parents' choice, not society's choice. Our choice." "And what choice is that?" She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "We choose each other, not because we have to, but because we want to. We choose to see where this leads us, even if it's scary, even if it's not what we planned. Even though we're probably crazy for falling in love with someone we're contractually obligated to marry, especially because of that." She laughed, and the sound was bright in the quiet night. "We're either the luckiest people alive, or we're about to make the most beautiful mistake in history." Leonard cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I can live with those odds. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a promise, a choice, a leap of faith taken together in the space between midnight and forever. When they broke apart, Leonard rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, when the officiant asks if I take you to be my wife, I want you to know that my answer has nothing to do with arrangements or expectations. What does it have to do with? You, just you, the woman who's become my favorite part of every day, before I even officially get to call her mine. As they sat together in the quiet park, hands intertwined and hearts finally honest, Amelia realized that sometime between the piano music and midnight confessions, she had stopped preparing for a wedding and started preparing for a marriage. Tomorrow wouldn't just be a ceremony, it would be a beginning, and for the first time in her life she couldn't wait to see what came next. "Stop fidgeting or I'll pin you to this chair." Celeste's mock threat made Amelia laugh, despite her nerves, as her friend applied the final touches of makeup in the bridal suite of the historic venue Leonard had chosen. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting everything in a golden glow that felt like a blessing. "I'm not fidgeting," Amelia protested, though her hands were indeed trembling slightly. "Honey, you've adjusted that necklace 14 times in the last 5 minutes. Celeste stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There. Perfect. You look like you stepped out of a fairy tale." Amelia turned to the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress fit like it had been crafted specifically for her body, the delicate beadwork catching the light with every breath. Her makeup was flawless but natural, enhancing her warm brown skin and bright eyes. But what struck her most was the glow that seemed to come from within, the unmistakable radiance of a woman in love. "He's going to lose his mind when he sees you," Celeste murmured, adjusting the simple veil that framed Amelia's face. A soft knock interrupted them. "Amelia, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "Come in, Mama." Her parents entered together, her father looking distinguished in his dark suit, her mother elegant in navy blue. Both stopped short when they saw her. "Oh, my baby girl," her mother whispered, tears immediately threatening her makeup. "Don't you dare cry and make me cry," Amelia warned, though her own voice was unsteady. Her father cleared his throat, his eyes suspiciously bright. You look exactly like your grandmother did on her wedding day." "Really? Really?" She would be so proud. He approached slowly, as if she were something precious that might disappear. "Are you happy, sweetheart? Truly happy?" The question was loaded with parental concern, with months of worry about whether they'd done right by their daughter. But as Amelia looked at her reflection one more time, she felt only certainty. "I'm happy, Daddy. More than I ever expected to be." Relief flooded his features. "That's all we ever wanted for you." Another knock, this one accompanied by Lenora, the wedding coordinator, peeking her head in. "It's time, ladies. The groom is in position and he looks—" She paused dramatically. "Well, let's just say he cleans up very nicely." Celeste gathered the train of Amelia's dress while her mother fussed with the veil one last time. As they prepared to leave the bridal suite, Amelia caught her reflection once more and thought about the woman who had tried on wedding dresses just weeks ago, terrified and uncertain. That woman felt like a stranger now. The walk down the hallway seemed both endless and far too short. Through the closed doors of the ceremony space, she could hear the gentle murmur of their guests, family, close friends, people who had watched both her and Leonard grow up in their respective worlds. "Ready?" her father asked, offering his arm. "Ready," she said, and meant it completely. The doors opened, and the first thing she saw was Leonard. He stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, his hands clasped in front of him, his usually composed expression completely undone by wonder. When their eyes met across the aisle lined with pink peonies and white roses, his face broke into a smile so radiant it took her breath away. The string quartet began playing, but Amelia barely heard the music. Her entire focus was on the man waiting for her, on the way he watched her approach as if she were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Halfway down the aisle, she caught Leonard mouthing the words, "So beautiful," and had to bite her lip to keep from grinning like a fool. By the time she reached him, both of them were beaming. "Hi," she whispered, as her father placed her hand in Leonard's. "Hi yourself," he whispered back, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "You're stunning." The ceremony began, but Amelia found herself lost in Leonard's eyes, in the way he was looking at her like she was his entire world. The officiant's words about love and commitment and choosing each other daily seemed to be speaking directly to their midnight conversation in the park. When it came time for vows, Leonard went first, his voice steady and clear as he spoke words they had written together the day before, words about partnership, respect, and the courage to build something beautiful together. But then he paused, smiled that soft smile she'd come to adore, and added quietly, "And Amelia, I promise to listen when you play piano, to remember that you like peonies better than roses, and to never stop being amazed that I get to call you mine." Her heart melted completely. When it was her turn, she managed to get through her prepared words about trust and growth and choosing love every day. But then she looked into his blue eyes and found herself saying, "And, Leonard, I promise to be brave enough to choose you not just today but every day, because loving you has taught me what it means to be truly myself." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Leonard's hands were already cradling her face. "Mrs. Clark," he murmured against her lips before kissing her, and the name sounded like coming home. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and well-wishes. Leonard never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his attention always returning to her, even in the middle of conversations with guests. During their first dance, he pulled her close and whispered, "No regrets?" "Only one," she said, her hands linked behind his neck. His expression flickered with concern. "What's that?" "That we didn't meet sooner." The relief and joy that crossed his face was worth every moment of uncertainty they'd endured. As they swayed to the music, surrounded by twinkling lights and the people they loved most, Amelia marveled at how perfectly everything had fallen into place. Later, as they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a surprise destination Leonard had planned, Celeste pulled her aside. "So how does it feel to be married to a man you're head over heels for?" "Terrifying," Amelia admitted with a laugh. "And absolutely perfect." "Good answer." Celeste hugged her tight. "Now go be ridiculously happy." As Leonard helped her into the car, his new wedding ring catching the light, Amelia caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had found her match, her partner, her choice. "Ready for our adventure, Mrs. Clark?" Leonard asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. "With you? I'm ready for anything." Back at the hotel suite, as Leonard closed the door behind them, the weight of what had just happened, what they had just committed to, settled over them both. The elegant suite was bathed in soft lamplight, rose petals scattered across the bed in a gesture that felt both romantic and suddenly overwhelming. Amelia stood near the window, still in her wedding dress, her hands trembling slightly as she looked out at the Atlanta skyline. The confidence she'd felt all day wavered as the reality of their wedding night approached. "Amelia," Leonard's voice was gentle behind her. She turned to find him watching her with understanding in his blue eyes. He'd removed his jacket and tie, looking more relaxed, but somehow more intimate in just his white dress shirt. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. He moved closer slowly, as if approaching something precious that might startle and flee. "Of me, of this, of not knowing what you expect, what this means, what happens now." Her voice was barely audible. I don't know how to be someone's wife." Leonard stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his expression. Gently he reached up and cupped her face in his hands. "Look at me," he said softly. When she met his eyes, he smiled, that tender smile she'd fallen in love with over the past weeks. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice filled with such warmth and promise that her fear began to melt away. The simple words, spoken with such gentle certainty, seemed to unlock something inside her. This was Leonard, the man who remembered her favorite flowers, who listened when she played piano, who had looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing in the world when she walked down that aisle. "Trust me," he repeated, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We'll figure this out together. No pressure, no expectations except to be kind to each other. We have all the time in the world." As he held her in their suite overlooking the city where their story began, Amelia felt the last of her anxiety fade away. Tomorrow they would wake up in Paris, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had become so much more than an arrangement. Some marriages began with passion, others with friendship. Theirs began with trust, and that, she realized, as Leonard held her close, was the strongest foundation of all. "You're staring at me." Amelia's voice was soft with sleep as she turned in Leonard's arms on the hotel balcony, where they'd fallen asleep watching the sunrise over Paris. The Eiffel Tower stood majestically in the distance, but Leonard's eyes hadn't left his wife's face since she'd dozed off against his chest an hour ago. "Can you blame me?" he murmured, brushing a curl away from her cheek. "I'm still processing that you're really mine." She stretched like a contented cat, the silk of her nightgown catching the golden morning light. What time is it?" "Early. We have the whole day ahead of us." His fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Clark?" The way he said her new name sent warmth through her entire body, like I'm living in a dream. A beautiful, terrifying dream. They'd arrived in Paris the night before, both exhausted from the wedding and the long flight. But as Leonard had led her to the balcony of their suite at the Hotel Plaza Athénée, with the city of lights spread out before them, Amelia had felt wide awake with possibility. Terrifying. Leonard's voice carried a note of concern. "The good kind of terrifying," she assured him, turning to face him fully. "The kind that means something important is happening." He was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "Can I confess something?" "Always. I've been to Paris dozens of times for business, but I've never actually experienced it. I was always in conference rooms or rushing between meetings." He paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I don't really know how to be a tourist in my own life." The vulnerability in his admission made her heart ache. "Then we'll learn together. I've never been to Paris at all, so we'll both be tourists. You don't mind that your husband doesn't know how to vacation?" She laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "Leonard, you're talking to a woman who had to Google, 'What do newlyweds do on honeymoons?' 3 days ago." His answering laugh was rich and warm. "And what did Google tell you? That we should probably leave this balcony eventually and see the city." She stood, extending her hand to him. "Come on, husband. Let's go learn how to be tourists together." An hour later, they walked hand in hand through the cobblestone streets of Montmartre, both dressed casually in jeans and comfortable sweaters. Leonard wore a baseball cap that made him look younger, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "This is incredible," Amelia breathed, spinning slowly to take in the artist's quarter, with its bohemian charm and stunning views of the city below. "Look," Leonard pointed to a small cafe, with tables spilling onto the sidewalk. "Want to try the most touristy thing possible and have coffee while people watching?" "Absolutely." They found a table in the sun, and Amelia watched in fascination as Leonard struggled with the French menu. "I thought all wealthy businessmen spoke French," she teased. "I can say hello, thank you, and where is the bathroom?" he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Beyond that, you're married to a linguistic disaster." "Good thing you're cute," she said, then blushed at her own boldness. The look Leonard gave her was intense enough to make her breath catch. "Say that again." "What, that you're cute?" "No, that I'm yours." The simple request, delivered in his low voice, sent heat spiraling through her. "You're mine," she said softly, and watched his eyes darken with something that made her pulse race. "And you're mine," he replied, leaning across the small table to kiss her gently. A nearby artist called out in accented English, "You two? So beautiful together. Let me draw you, yes?" Before either could protest, the elderly Frenchman was already sketching, capturing them in the moment of their kiss. 20 minutes later, he presented them with a charming drawing of two people completely lost in each other. "For your love story," he said with a wink, accepting Leonard's generous payment. As they continued exploring, Amelia marveled at how different Leonard seemed here, away from Atlanta and business and the weight of expectations. He bought her flowers from a street vendor, attempted to order lunch in broken French that made her giggle, and got them thoroughly lost trying to find the Louvre without a map. "We're terrible at this," Leonard laughed, as they stood at yet another confusing intersection. "We're learning," Amelia corrected, pulling out her phone to check their location, "and having fun doing it." "Is this what normal couples do? Get lost and laugh about it?" The question was asked lightly, but Amelia heard the real curiosity beneath it. "I don't know what normal couples do," she said honestly, "but I know what we do, and I like what we do." That evening, Leonard surprised her by arranging a private dinner on a Seine riverboat. As Paris glided by in the twilight, all golden lights and romantic shadows, they talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. "I want to ask you something," Leonard said as they stood at the boat's railing, the Eiffel Tower twinkling ahead of them. "But I need you to promise to answer honestly, okay? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently? Not through an arrangement, but naturally?" Amelia considered the question, watching the water ripple in their wake. "Sometimes, but then I think about how perfect the timing was. 3 months ago, I was too scared to make my own choices. A year from now, you might have been married to someone else your family deemed suitable." She turned to face him. "Maybe we needed the arrangement to find each other." "You really believe that?" "I believe that sometimes the best things come in unexpected packages." She smiled up at him. "Like falling in love with someone you're contractually obligated to marry." He pulled her closer, his arms circling her waist. "Amelia, what we have, it's not about contracts anymore. You know that, right?" "I know," she whispered. "What we have is choice. Every day we choose each other." "Every day," he agreed, and kissed her under the Paris stars. Later, as they returned to their hotel suite, Leonard stopped abruptly in the lobby. "What's wrong?" Amelia asked. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." He turned to her, his expression serious. "I just realized something. For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with, doing exactly what makes me happy." "And what's that?" "Being your husband." As they rode the elevator to their suite, Amelia reflected on how much had changed since their midnight meeting in the Atlanta park. That night, they'd been two people choosing to take a leap of faith together. Now in the most romantic city in the world, they were discovering what it meant to land safely in love. Tomorrow they would explore more of Paris, make more memories, continue learning how to be tourists in their own love story. But tonight, as Leonard carried her over the threshold of their suite, a gesture that was both traditional and sweetly silly, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. In Paris, in love, and in the arms of the man who had become her greatest adventure. Some honeymoons were about passion, others about relaxation. Theirs was about discovery, of the city, of each other, and of the beautiful life they were building together. One choice at a time. "You've been staring at that phone for 20 minutes. Amelia's voice was gentle but concerned as she set down her coffee cup on the small table of their Parisian café. They'd been in the city for 4 days, and this was the first time she'd seen Leonard's face cloud over with the familiar tension of business concerns. "I'm sorry," Leonard said, finally putting the phone face down on the table. There's something happening with one of the hotels back home. Bad something or manageable something?" He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the casual style she'd grown to love. "Potentially bad. The flagship hotel in New York, there's been an issue with the renovation project. Cost overruns, delays, unhappy investors." Amelia watched his shoulders tense with each word. In the past 4 days, she'd watched him transform into someone lighter, more spontaneous, genuinely happy. Now, with one phone call, she could see him slipping back into the rigid businessman she'd first met. "What does that mean for us?" she asked quietly. "It means—" He stopped, looking at her with something like surprise. "I was about to say it means we need to cut the honeymoon short, but that's what the old Leonard would have said." "And what does the new Leonard say?" "The new Leonard wants to ask his wife what she thinks they should do." The simple act of being asked for her opinion, of being included in the decision, made her heart warm. "I think," she said carefully, "that whatever we decide together. But I also think you should tell me what's really worrying you." Leonard was quiet for a moment, watching people pass by on the busy Parisian street. "This hotel, it was my first major project after taking over from my father's partners. If it fails, if I can't handle this crisis, it reflects on everything. My credibility, my judgment, my ability to lead." "Your worth as a person?" she asked gently. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you worried about the business, or are you worried about what people will think of Leonard Clark if the business has problems?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for so long that she wondered if she'd overstepped. "How did you know that?" he asked finally. "Because I spent 25 years being worried about what people would think of Amelia Johnson if she made her own choices instead of following everyone else's expectations." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And because I recognized the look of someone who's forgotten the difference between who they are and what they do." Leonard's fingers tightened around hers. "I've been managing crises for so long, I forgot that I don't have to manage them alone anymore." "You don't," she said simply. "So what do we do?" "We? Leonard Clark, if you think I'm going to let you carry this alone just because we've only been married for 4 days, you clearly don't know your wife very well." The smile that crossed his face was the first genuine one she'd seen since the phone rang. "What do you suggest, Mrs. Clark?" "I suggest we call them back, get all the information, and make a plan, together. And if we need to go home, we go home. Paris will still be here later. You'd really be okay with cutting our honeymoon short? Amelia looked around at the charming cafe, at the Parisian life bustling around them, at the romantic city she'd dreamed of visiting her entire life. Then she looked at her husband's worried face and knew there was only one answer. Leonard, these 4 days have been magical, but home is wherever you are, not wherever we are. If you need to be in New York, then we need to be in New York. God, I love you, he said, the words slipping out with such honest intensity that both of them froze. It was the first time either of them had said it. I love you too, she whispered, and watched wonder spread across his features. Really, really, which is why we're going to handle this together, and why I'm not letting you turn back into the man who carries the world on his shoulders alone. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly. What did I do to deserve you? You asked me to trust you, she said simply, and now I'm asking you to trust me. 2 hours later, they were on a conference call with Leonard's management team. Amelia curled up beside him on the hotel bed with a notepad, asking pointed questions about timelines and contractors that impressed everyone on the call. How does your wife know about construction delays? His operations manager Garrett asked during a brief hold. She's smarter than all of us, Leonard replied, earning a playful swat from Amelia. By the end of the call, they had a plan. Leonard would return to New York to personally oversee the renovation crisis, but not alone. Amelia would come with him, and together they would tackle the problem that had seemed insurmountable when faced in isolation. So, she said, as they began packing, our first crisis as a married couple. Are you nervous? Terrified, she admitted with a laugh. I know nothing about hotels or construction or angry investors, but you know about people, about seeing past the surface to what really matters, about finding solutions instead of just identifying problems. Leonard paused in folding his shirts to look at her. That's what I need right now, not another business advisor. I need my partner. Your partner, she repeated, liking the sound of it. My wife, my best friend, my voice of reason when I'm about to make decisions based on fear instead of wisdom. As their plane lifted off from Paris that evening, Amelia watched the city of light disappear below them. She felt a pang of sadness for the romantic honeymoon they were cutting short, but it was overshadowed by something stronger. Excitement about facing their first real challenge together. Regrets? Leonard asked, following her gaze out the window. Only one, she said, settling against his shoulder. I wish we'd tried the croissants from that bakery near Notre Dame. That's it? That's your only regret about leaving Paris early to deal with a business crisis? That's it. She tilted her head to look at him. Leonard, we'll have other trips to Paris. We'll have plenty of time for romance and sightseeing and lazy mornings on hotel balconies. But right now you need me, and I need to be the kind of wife who shows up when you need me. Even when showing up means diving headfirst into a disaster you know nothing about. Especially then, she kissed his jaw softly. Besides, how hard can it be? Leonard's laugh was rich with affection and just a touch of hysteria. Famous last words, Mrs. Clark. Bring it on, Mr. Clark. As their plane flew through the night toward New York and uncertainty, Amelia realized that their real honeymoon hadn't been about Paris at all. It had been about learning to face the world as a team, about choosing each other not just in moments of joy, but in moments of challenge. Paris had been beautiful, but this, sitting beside her husband as they flew toward their first crisis together, this felt like the real beginning of their marriage, and despite everything waiting for them in New York, she couldn't wait to see what they could accomplish together. The numbers don't lie, Leonard. We're looking at a $2 million shortfall. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife, as Garrett, Leonard's operations manager, delivered the news that everyone had been dreading. Amelia sat quietly in the corner, taking notes and observing the dynamics of the meeting, trying to understand not just the numbers but the people behind them. It had been 3 days since their return from Paris, and Leonard had barely slept. She'd watched him transform back into the rigid, controlling businessman she'd first met, the softness they'd discovered in Paris, hidden behind walls of stress and responsibility. What about the alternative materials Marcus suggested? Leonard's voice was clipped, professional, but Amelia could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. Still too expensive, replied Vanessa, the project manager, and the delays would push us back another 6 weeks minimum. Which means more investor meetings, more explanations, more questions about my competence, Leonard muttered, running a hand through his hair. Leonard, Amelia said quietly from her corner. It was the first time she'd spoken in the 2-hour meeting, and everyone turned to look at her. Can I ask a question? Of course. What was the original vision for this hotel? Not the budget, not the timeline. What were you trying to create? Leonard looked surprised by the question. A boutique hotel that felt like home, somewhere business travelers could feel human, less corporate, more personal. And the renovations that are causing the problems, do they serve that vision? Some of them, he admitted. Others, he paused, really thinking about it for the first time in weeks. Others were just expensive because they seemed impressive. Amelia set down her notebook and moved to the whiteboard at the front of the room. May I? Leonard nodded, curious. She wrote 3 words on the board: essential, important, impressive. What if we categorized every renovation decision into these 3 categories, she suggested. Essential, things that make the hotel safe and functional. Important, things that serve your original vision. Impressive, things that look good but don't actually improve the guest experience. Garrett leaned forward. And then what? We keep essential, we find creative ways to achieve important, and we eliminate impressive. The room was quiet for a moment, as everyone processed the elegant simplicity of her approach. That's, Vanessa said slowly, actually brilliant. I mean, do we really need imported Italian marble in the lobby bathrooms when local stone would be just as beautiful and 1/3 of the cost? Exactly, Amelia said, warming to the topic. What makes a hotel feel like home? It's not the most expensive materials, it's the thoughtful details, the comfort, the feeling that someone cares about your experience. Leonard was staring at her with something like awe. You're right. We got so caught up in trying to compete with the luxury chains that we forgot what made our original concept special. For the next hour, they went through the renovation plans systematically, applying Amelia's framework. By the end, they'd identified nearly $1 million in cuts that wouldn't compromise the hotel's vision. In fact, they would enhance it. This could actually work, Marcus, the head contractor, said, with the first smile Amelia had seen from him all week. The timeline becomes manageable, the budget becomes realistic, and honestly, the hotel's going to be better this way. As the meeting dispersed, Leonard lingered in the conference room with Amelia. That was incredible, he said quietly. Where did that come from? From watching you stress about this for 3 days and realizing you'd lost sight of why you loved this project in the first place, she replied simply. Sometimes you need someone outside the situation to ask the obvious questions. The obvious questions that none of us thought to ask. She smiled, moving closer to him. That's because you were all so focused on solving the problem that you forgot to examine whether you were solving the right problem. Leonard pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in days she felt him truly relax. I'm sorry I've been such a mess since we got back. You haven't been a mess. You've been scared. There's a difference. Scared of failing. Scared of proving that everyone who ever doubted me was right. And what are you scared of now? He considered the question seriously. Now I'm scared that I don't deserve you. That somehow I tricked you into marrying me and you're going to realize you could do so much better. The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. Leonard Clark, look at me. He met her eyes, his blue gaze uncertain. Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night when I was terrified and uncertain? Trust me, he said quietly. Trust me, she repeated. I chose you, not the successful businessman, not the hotel empire, not the impressive bank account. I chose you. The man who remembers I like peonies, who gets lost in Paris and laughs about it, who asks for my opinion and actually listens to the answer. Even when my opinion saves your business, she laughed. Especially then. That wasn't me saving your business, Leonard. That was us working together. That was a team. A team, he repeated, testing the words. A partnership. Isn't that what you promised me? That we'd be partners? Equal partners, he confirmed, and she could see the shift in his posture as he remembered who they were together, not who he was afraid of becoming alone. So, what do we do now? Now we go home, order takeout from that Thai place you found, and celebrate the fact that we just saved a hotel and possibly your sanity. That's your idea of celebrating. Leonard, 3 days ago, we were having breakfast on a balcony in Paris. Today we solved a $2 million crisis before lunch. I'd say we've earned some pad thai and bad reality TV. His laugh was the first genuine one she'd heard since they'd left France. God, I love you. I love you too, and I love that we make a really good team. The best team, he agreed, kissing her forehead softly. As they left the office building and stepped into the New York afternoon, Leonard took her hand and squeezed it gently. Amelia? Yes? Thank you. For seeing what I couldn't see. For being what I didn't know I needed. What's that? My partner. In everything. Walking down the busy Manhattan street, surrounded by the energy and chaos of the city, Amelia marveled at how different this felt from their romantic strolls through Paris. This was real life, messy, challenging, unpredictable. But as Leonard's thumb stroked over her wedding ring, and he looked at her like she'd just saved his world, she realized this was exactly where she wanted to be, in the middle of real life, with the man who trusted her enough to let her help carry his burdens. Some partnerships were born in boardrooms. Theirs was born in crisis and strengthened by the simple act of choosing each other, over and over again. And that, she thought with a smile, was worth more than all the Parisian sunrises in the world. "We need to talk." The words hit Leonard like ice water as he looked up from his laptop to find Amelia standing in the doorway of their home office, her expression unreadable. It had been 2 weeks since they'd saved the hotel project, 2 weeks of settling into married life in Leonard's Manhattan penthouse, 2 weeks of what he'd thought was happiness. Apparently, he'd been wrong. "Of course," he said, closing the laptop and giving her his full attention. "What's on your mind?" Amelia moved into the room but didn't sit down, her hands clasped in front of her in a way that made his stomach clench with anxiety. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this arrangement, about what we're doing." The word arrangement felt like a slap. They hadn't used that term in weeks, not since Paris, not since they'd fallen in love, not since they'd become a real team. "What about it?" His voice came out more defensive than he intended. "Leonard, I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. When you married me, not when you fell in love with me, but when you originally agreed to marry me, what did you think you were getting?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what was your expectation? A quiet wife who'd look good at business dinners, someone who'd manage your social calendar and stay out of your professional life, a beautiful accessory who'd make you look settled and responsible." Each word felt like an accusation, and Leonard's defenses rose instinctively. "That's not fair, Amelia. You know it's more than that now." "Now, yes. But then?" She moved closer, her dark eyes intense. "Because I've been watching you these past 2 weeks, watching how surprised you get every time I have an opinion about your business, every time I contribute something useful, and I keep wondering, did you marry me expecting me to be decoration?" The directness of the question, the pain he could hear beneath her calm tone, made something click into place. This wasn't an attack. This was fear. "Sit down," he said gently. "Please." She hesitated, then settled into the chair across from his desk, but her posture remained tense. Leonard took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation would either strengthen their marriage or destroy it, and that everything depended on his absolute honesty. "Yes," he said quietly. "Originally I thought I was getting a beautiful, well-bred wife who would fit seamlessly into my life without changing anything fundamental about how I operated." The pain that flashed across her face nearly broke him, but he forced himself to continue. "I thought I was getting someone safe, someone who wouldn't challenge me or push me or make me question whether I was living my life or just going through the motions." He leaned forward, his voice growing more urgent. "I thought I was getting exactly what I thought I wanted, a partner who would enhance my image without threatening my control. And instead, I got you." His voice softened. "I got a woman who sees solutions I can't see, who asks questions that change everything, who makes me better at my own job and better at being human. I got someone who's not just beautiful, though God knows you are, but brilliant and funny and brave in ways that terrify me." "Terrify you? Amelia, do you have any idea how much you've changed my life? 2 months ago, I was a man who measured success by quarterly reports and investor approval. Now I'm a man who measures success by whether I made my wife laugh at breakfast." She was quiet, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "But here's the thing," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I didn't marry you expecting decoration. I married you hoping for partnership. I just didn't know what real partnership looked like until I had it. And what does it look like? It looks like you walking into that conference room and solving a problem that had me paralyzed for days. It looks like you asking me what I really wanted to create, not just what I wanted to prove. It looks like you seeing who I could be instead of just who I was." Amelia's expression began to soften, but Leonard wasn't finished. "You want complete honesty? Here it is. I'm terrified every day that you're going to realize you settled, that you married a man who's still learning how to be worthy of you, that you're going to wake up one morning and realize you could have chosen anyone, and you chose someone who didn't even know how to vacation properly." "Leonard, I'm not done." He stood up, moving around the desk to face her directly. You asked what I thought I was getting when I married you. Now let me tell you what I actually got. I got a woman who makes me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. I got a partner who sees possibilities I can't imagine. I got someone who loves me not because I'm successful or impressive, but because of who I am when I'm with her. Tears had started to form in her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. And yes, I'm still surprised sometimes when you have insights about my business. Not because I don't think you're capable, but because I keep forgetting that I get to have this. A wife who's also my best advisor, my strongest supporter, and my favorite person to talk to about everything. 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 Amelia, you didn't just marry me. You saved me. From a life of going through the motions, from measuring my worth by other people's expectations, from never knowing what it feels like to have someone choose me, not for what I can provide, but for who I am. She stood up then, moving close enough that he could see the tears she was trying not to shed. Can I tell you something now? She asked softly. Anything. I wasn't asking because I doubted you. I was asking because I doubted me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Because sometimes I look around this penthouse, I think about your world, your success, your sophistication, and I wonder what you see in a girl from Atlanta who had to Google, "What do newlyweds do on honeymoons?" Leonard reached up to cup her face in his hands. You want to know what I see? She nodded. I see the woman who turned our arranged marriage into the greatest love story I never knew I wanted. I see someone who's brave enough to marry a stranger and smart enough to turn him into her best friend. I see the person who makes me laugh every day and challenges me to think differently about everything. Leonard, I see my wife, my partner, my choice. He rested his forehead against hers. And if you're having doubts, if you're wondering whether you made the right decision, let me be clear. You didn't just make the right decision. You made the best decision either of us will ever make, even though we're both still figuring out how to be married. Especially because of that. Amelia, we get to build this together. We get to decide what our marriage looks like, what our partnership means, what our love story becomes. She reached up to cover his hands with hers. What do you want it to become? Everything, he said without hesitation. I want us to become everything we never knew we could be together. When she kissed him, it was with the same intensity as their first kiss, but deeper, layered with understanding and choice and the absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too. And Amelia, yes? Thank you for asking the hard questions, for pushing us to be honest about what we want and what we're building. That's what partners do, right? That's what partners do. As they stood together in the quiet of their home office, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, his business papers mixed with her sheet music, her coffee mug next to his laptop, their wedding photos smiling at them from the bookshelf, Leonard realized that this conversation hadn't been a crisis at all. It had been a choice. Another choice in the long series of choices that had brought them from an arrangement to a marriage, to whatever beautiful thing they were becoming, and he couldn't wait to see what they would choose next. 2 years later, she still returned to the same piano bench every morning, but this time with a soft smile and a steady step. The sunlight streaming through the windows of their renovated brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was different from the harsh Manhattan penthouse light, warmer, gentler, more like home. Amelia's fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had finally learned to trust her own voice, both in music and in life. You're up early? Leonard's voice was rough with sleep as he appeared in the doorway, hair mussed and wearing the Columbia University t-shirt she'd bought him when she'd started her graduate program in music therapy. I couldn't sleep. Too excited. She turned on the bench to face him, her eyes bright with anticipation. Today's the day. Today's the day, he agreed, moving behind her to massage her shoulders as she played. It had become their morning ritual, music and touch and the quiet intimacy of two people who had learned to build a life together rather than just share one. In 2 hours, they would open the doors of the Harmony House, the boutique hotel that had started as Leonard's crisis and become their shared dream. Not just a place for business travelers, but a destination for couples taking their first trips together, families celebrating reunions, artists seeking inspiration. Each room was designed around a different musical theme, with curated playlists, instruments for guests to enjoy, and monthly concerts in the lobby featuring local musicians. It had been Amelia's idea to pivot the struggling New York hotel into something completely different, Leonard's idea to make her a full partner in both the concept and the business. Together, they'd created something neither could have imagined alone. Nervous? He asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Terrified, she admitted with a laugh. Good terrified. The kind of terrified that means something important is happening. The very best kind. They'd learned to distinguish between different types of fear over the past 2 years. The fear that paralyzed versus the fear that motivated. The fear that came from insecurity versus the fear that came from growth. Today's nervousness felt like Christmas morning, all anticipation and joy wrapped up in butterflies. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted their quiet moment. Through the window, they could see Celeste climbing out of a taxi, her arms full of flowers and her face beaming with pride. The cavalry has arrived, Leonard observed with affection. He'd grown genuinely fond of Amelia's best friend, especially after she'd threatened to personally destroy him if he ever hurt Amelia. Celeste took her role as protective best friend very seriously. And knowing Celeste, she's brought enough flowers to supply a wedding. Speaking of which, Leonard said casually, your parents called last night. They wanted to make sure we'd have time to talk about Christmas plans after the opening. Christmas plans? Amelia turned to look at him suspiciously. It's only October, Leonard. What Christmas plans? Oh, you know, the usual. Where to have dinner, who's cooking, whether we'll need to set up the guest room for... He paused dramatically. Visitors? What visitors? Well, my mother's been dropping hints about wanting to spend more time in New York, and your parents mentioned something about maybe staying longer than just a weekend. Something about wanting to be around for... He was grinning now, clearly enjoying himself. Important family developments. Amelia narrowed her eyes. Leonard Clark, what are you not telling me? Instead of answering, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Leonard, we're already married, she said, confused but smiling. I know, but I never properly proposed to you. I never got down on one knee and asked you to choose me because you wanted to, not because you had to. Her breath caught as he knelt beside the piano bench, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, not the practical diamond from their engagement, but a unique piece with warm golden stones that caught the morning light like music made visible. Amelia Clark, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you marry me again? Not because our families arranged it, not because it makes practical sense, but because you love me and want to build a life with me and can't imagine doing any of this with anyone else. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked at this man who continued to surprise her with his capacity for romance and grand gestures hidden behind practical facades. Are you asking me to have a second wedding? She laughed through her tears. I'm asking you to have the wedding we want, not the one we thought we were supposed to have. Small, intimate, just us and the people we love most. Maybe in the hotel garden, maybe with you playing piano instead of hiring musicians, maybe with vows we write ourselves about choosing each other every single day. And Christmas visitors? Well, he said with a grin that was pure mischief, someone has to help us plan it. And someone has to help us celebrate afterward when we tell them about all the other plans we've been making. Other plans? Room renovations, lifestyle changes, discussions about the future that might involve converting one of our spare bedrooms into something a little more specialized. The implication hit her like sunrise, bright and warm and full of possibility. Leonard, only if you want to, only when you're ready. But Amelia, I can't think of anything I'd love more than raising children with you, teaching them piano, showing them how to run a business, watching you become an even more amazing mother than you are a wife and partner. She was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the beautiful complexity of their life, a hotel opening in 2 hours, a second proposal on a Tuesday morning, dreams of children and Christmas mornings, and growing old together. Yes, she whispered. Yes to marrying you again. Yes to the life we're building. Yes to whatever comes next as long as we face it together. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like a promise renewed and a future embraced. When he kissed her, it tasted like morning coffee and infinite possibility. Mrs. Clark, he murmured against her lips. Mr. Clark, she replied, and the names felt like coming home. Later, as they stood in the lobby of Harmony House watching their first guests check in, a young couple celebrating their anniversary, an elderly man who'd driven from Philadelphia to hear jazz in the city where he'd met his late wife, a family with teenage twins who immediately gravitated toward the piano in the corner. Amelia marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from an arranged marriage to a love story. From strangers to partners, to best friends to a couple planning their second wedding and dreaming of babies. From a hotel crisis to a thriving business built on the simple idea that the best places feel like home. Any regrets? Leonard asked, his arm around her waist as they watched their guests settle into the space they'd created together. "Only one," she said, leaning into his warmth. "What's that?" "That we can't go back and tell our younger selves not to worry so much. That sometimes the most beautiful things begin with the simplest words." "What words?" She turned in his arms, looking into the blue eyes that had become her favorite view in any city, and smiled with the confidence of a woman who had learned to trust in love that chose itself over and over again. "Trust me." Would you have made the same choice? What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to build a life with someone? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.